Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Russia, the world's second largest oil exporter, says it will not sell oil subject to Western price caps, even if it must cut production. Russia and Belarus sign revised regional security protocol. And 9 grain from Ukraine ships leave Odessa port with 336,000 tons of agricultural products. We sincerely hope you have a pleasant week ahead, but we begin with Russia's Deputy Prime Minister, who has announced that Moscow, the world's second largest oil exporter, will not sell oil that is subject to a Western price cap, even if it has to cut production. Alexander Novak made this known after the G7 and Australia agreed to a $60 per barrel price cap on Russian seaborne crude oil, prohibiting shipping and insurance companies from handling cargoes of Russian crude above the cap. The price cap aims to reduce Russia's income from selling oil and prevent a spike in global oil prices. Russia called the cap a gross interference that would destabilize global energy markets. Russian President Vladimir Putin in September had warned the West that he could cut off energy supplies if price caps were imposed, telling them that Europe would freeze. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the $60 price cap on seaborne Russian oil is not serious and will do little to deter Russia from waging war in Ukraine. The European Union is now set to approve the cap after the G7 and Australia struck the deal. Andriy Yermak, head of Mr. Zelensky's administration, said earlier that the cap should be set at $30 to destroy the enemy's economy quicker. Mr. Zelensky complained that the world had shown weakness by setting the cap at $60, which he said would swell Russia's budget by $100 billion a year.
Завершилась, на жаль, без серйозних рішень дискусія щодо price cap.
Now, the world discussion on price caps, that is on limiting the export price of Russian oil, has ended. Unfortunately, with no serious decisions. To set such a limit for Russian prices is quite comfortable for the budget of a terrorist state. Russia has already caused colossal losses to all countries of the world by deliberately destabilizing the energy market. And the world cannot dare its real energy disarmament. This is a weak position, and it's only a matter of time before stronger tools will have to be used anyway. If the price limit for Russian oil is $60 instead of, for example, $30, which was voiced in particular by Poland and the Baltic states, then the Russian budget will receive about $100 billion per year.
Ці гроші підуть не тільки на війну і не тільки на подальше спонсорування Росії.
In the meantime, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has held talks with his Belarusian counterpart Viktor Krenin. The two sides discussed bilateral military cooperation and amended an agreement on the joint provision of regional security. Later, General Shoigu met with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Russia and Belarus are formally part of a union state and are closely allied economically and militarily, with Moscow using Belarus as a staging post for its February 24 special military operation in Ukraine.
Yours and our officers are preparing the Belarusian boys and Russians as well to, in case it is necessary, so that the defenders of our union state could repel any kind of aggression from that territory. If they want to fight to the last Ukrainian or even Polish or any mercenary, it's their business. It's their right. At the moment, neither me nor our special forces see that they were ready for any serious talks or the readiness to talk like normal people. We just don't see it. We think that all they think about is how to continue the war. Well, in that case, the special operation will not end. You know it better than me. We will exchange opinions on that matter.
Some 150 pro-Russia demonstrators met fierce opposition from counter-protesters at the weekend when they took to the streets of the western city of Cologne, demanding an end to arms exports to Ukraine and a ban on NATO. According to Cologne police spokesperson Christoph Gills, the demonstration in support of Moscow was organized by a, quote, private individual. Placards among the pro-Russia demonstrators had slogans in German, such as arms exports, ignite World War III, while the counter-demonstrators carried a large banner reading Nazis out, Cologne remains anti-fascists. The protests came 2 days after German Chancellor Olaf Scholz urged Russian President Vladimir Putin by phone to find a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine conflict. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin accused Russia of deliberate cruelty in its war in Ukraine, saying Moscow was intentionally targeting civilians. General Austin told the Reagan National Defense Forum in Simi Valley, California, that Russian attacks had left children dead and destroyed hospitals and schools. Russia has been pounding Ukraine's electricity infrastructure since early October, causing blackouts and leaving millions without heating as temperatures plummet.
And Putin's war is not the result of NATO expansion. It is the cause of NATO expansion. And now, because of the Kremlin's longing for a vanished empire, Europe faces its worst security crisis since the end of World War II. And a member of the UN Security Council, let me say that again. A member of the UN Security Council is waging war to deny democracy to more than 43 million people. With deliberate cruelty, Russia is putting civilians and civilian infrastructure in its gun sights. Russian forces have killed thousands of Ukrainian citizens, even as millions more have fled. And Russian attacks have left children dead, schools shattered, and hospitals smashed. So Russia's neighbors view its imperial aggression with growing alarm. And Putin's war of choice has given everyone on earth a preview of a world of tyranny and turmoil that nobody would want to live in.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says a ship with Ukrainian wheat destined for Ethiopia has arrived in the port of Dorele in neighboring Djibouti. The first vessel to sail as part of a push to send food to countries most vulnerable to famine and drought. Mr. Zelensky said in a social media post, quote, "We ship food, we ship hope." Mr. Zelensky adds that by early next year, a total of around 60 ships would have delivered a cargo. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Ministry of Infrastructure says 9 grain from Ukraine ships with a combined 336,000 tons of agricultural products have left Odessa ports. The program is a humanitarian initiative with Ukraine planning to send over 60 ships of critically needed food products to Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Congo, Kenya, and Yemen. The Infrastructure Ministry wrote in a statement, in the past 2 days, the ports of Greater Odessa sent 9 ships with 336,000 tons of agricultural products to countries of Africa, Asia, and Europe, adding that since the beginning of the implementation of the grain initiative, the world has received 13 million tons of Ukrainian food. Let's talk now to Stephen Hayes, President Cohen and Woods International, who joins us from Danbury, Connecticut in the United States. Good morning to you, Stephen. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Lonnie. Good to see you again, too. Thank you.
Let's begin with this price cap, the energy deal reached by the West on Russian oil. It seems as if nobody is satisfied with this deal, apparently, because the Russians say they will not obey Ukraine, at whose behest the deal was struck, is also not happy. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's a case of all sides having a point of view that, in some ways, is correct. For instance, I don't think that Mr. Zelensky is wrong that this is a fairly weak deal. I think it's going to be very hard to enforce. I think also on the other hand, I think the Russians won't capitulate. They'll continue to rely on other sources, particularly for their income, particularly China and Asia, which also need energy sources, as does every country in the world. So I think it's going to be a very slow process. I question how much effect it will have. I think it's a political compromise, which probably is necessary out of fear of eventually citizen reaction in Europe. So it's going to be just one piece of many parts that are going to have to be laid down before we can have people coming to the table to talk on peace.
Now, do you think, as you said, political compromises here, but doesn't it look to you perhaps that already the solidarity on this issue is perhaps fraying? I mean, you're aware that the Germans, without consultation with the rest of the Allies, put up a 200 billion euro plan for their own country in terms of helping to stave off high energy prices and keep businesses running. And then, of course, the United States has its own strategic reserve, which it has been using to help others. So it's not everyone who is at the same stage, as it were, here. There are countries who are completely without any means of supplies and who will particularly be vulnerable if things go really, really bad.
Well, that's exactly right. I think this coalition, as much as united NATO has appeared to be, I think the coalition has been fragile from the very start. Again, geopolitics. Germany has been dependent. I think Angela Merkel made Germany dependent by agreeing on the pipeline, and Russia is a primary, if not almost a singular, source of energy for Germany. So Germany is going to do whatever they can to accommodate their own people, as you would argue that, yes, that makes a lot of sense. You also have the history of Germany and the fact of East and West still somewhat apart culturally, and that's going to also put a lot of political pressure on some type of unity within Germany. So I think Germany is beginning to evolve as a key to this. I think it probably always was a key to European unity. And so I think that fragility is going to continue. It's going to require extraordinary management from the Europeans especially to keep that coalition going. I think this is what Mr. Putin is counting on. The leader of Germany has already called Putin and encouraged talks. So that hasn't necessarily set well with other European countries. It probably hasn't set well with the United States either.
Let's look at the United States' own position in all of this. It has led this from the start, both in terms of money and in terms of military aid, support, in terms of releasing supplies from its strategic reserve to help some of the countries in the immediate aftermath of this crisis. But within the United States itself, President Joe Biden seemed to have done a lot better. His administration and the Democrats did a lot better than anyone anticipated in the midterm elections. Do you think that, to some extent, was down to his leadership on this issue of Ukraine?
Well, I think that I'd like to say I recall not everyone thought it was going to be a Republican romp. I think you and I talked about this, and I said it was going to be very, very close, much closer than the polls were saying. Again, the polls were wrong. Certainly you have to credit Biden's leadership to whatever extent. I think that the election in the U.S. that brought about a much stronger Democratic Party, even though Republicans have narrowly taken over the House, it should be credited to the saying that all politics is local. There were local issues. The fear of the far right that Trump represented, I think, drove people to the polls as well. It also drove the moderate Republicans over and so forth. So it wasn't simply Biden's leadership, but I think it was more a concern of where the nation is headed. And I think that concern is still there, but at least a sigh of relief in that the balance of government is still existing. There seems to be a stronger push back towards the center. And so certainly credit President Biden, but the leader always gets credit or blame for some things that just simply are other factors that have driven that. So I think, and generally on Ukraine, to return more to the subject, I guess, is the people of the United States are still highly, I would say, sympathetic to Ukraine. Different reasons for that, but that's also going to be very difficult for Republicans to challenge the support for Ukraine from President Biden. So it's going to be, again, the next 2 years is going to be a critical situation, but I think that the reality is that the support for Ukraine will remain fairly strong in the United States. Now, what does that mean? I'm not sure. Certainly, there's a strong push because there is a stronger Republican Party now as well. There'll be, I think, be a stronger push for compromise for some peace talks. But on the terms of those peace talks are going to determine where they really happen.
You're also President Emeritus of the Corporate Council on Africa, so you're very familiar. The Russians are very well entrenched on the African continent. The Ukrainians, not so much until recently when they started trying to make forays. Now there is this humanitarian grain initiative that I just reported on. 9 ships so far have loaded and left. One, in fact, has arrived in Djibouti on its way, well, for the products to be on their way to Ethiopia. And of course, this is both a humanitarian gesture, but it's also a political one designed to get Ukraine support on the continent. How much success do you think they will have with that?
I think it's also an economic impetus. It's no humanitarian push is ever without money behind it in some ways. So Ukraine did receive money for the grain, as they rightly should. Certainly, it's humanitarian. Does it change the picture of African support for Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia? I'm not so sure. I think that what will change is the awareness of how much parts of Africa depend on Ukraine, and so that's going to, I hope, at least put a stronger dialogue within countries and within countries' leaderships on the importance of the Ukraine-Russia war. It's hard to remain neutral. I understand why African countries would want to, and I understand any country in terms of war would want to remain neutral as much as possible. I think the grain push does help Ukraine in the sense that it makes people aware of how much food support does actually come from Ukraine annually in peacetime or wartime. Does it help change policy? Probably not much. It just helps change somewhat the awareness and the dynamics and the importance of this war.
You're also former president of the American Center for International Leadership, and in that role, amongst others, you've also visited the former Soviet Union really, really frequently. So I want to ask you, how much trouble, because if you read reports in the media, mostly Western media, President Vladimir Putin is in some trouble domestically with people who are not so sure that, this time he's got his plan right, and his position may be shaky. Do you see that? Do you see that on the horizon from what you know about that country, about those neck of the woods?
I don't feel it's as shaky as we present it. He has really gone back to the old Soviet model of oppression. The people can only speak out so much. Those who are speaking out are being jailed, oppressed in different ways. So I think that the wish list that includes Putin being overthrown is exactly that. It's a wish list. I don't see it strongly based in reality, given Russian history, given Soviet history. I think that whether he has the majority support of the Russian people, it's difficult to say. I would like to think not, but I think that in many cases, probably most countries, we're all patriots to the country that we live in for a while until we begin to look at how it affects us. I don't think it's had a strong effect on the Russian people itself in terms of economics, in terms of daily life. So I think that he's still in power, and he's certainly taken steps to eliminate political opponents as well, so by jailing or worse. So I think it's to hope for a Putin overthrow is pie in the sky, as we might say. I do think that what will determine his fate is this war itself. Russia, in his mind, and I think in the minds of the military, require that safety corridor for its navy. If in fact they don't have those 4 provinces, or at least 3 out of those 4 provinces that they have somewhat incorporated, I should say, illegally into the government, and Crimea, then their Russian navy is incapacitated to a considerable extent. They can't get through the Baltic because, again, the NATO alliance controls that. They have a cold water port in the Arctic that's all frozen over at times. They have a Pacific fleet that is blocked. They really need the warm water port. It's the Black Sea is the only warm water port that they can operate all year long. And so I should say the Black Sea is the access, and the cold water port, their warm water port, is in Crimea. So it's one that they have to maintain. They have to win that war if they are to become return to being an imperial force. So there's a great deal at stake on that. It's going to be very difficult for Russia to compromise on this, just as it's obviously very difficult for the Ukraine to compromise.
Indeed, indeed it is. Stephen Hayes, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. When next I have you on the show, we'll be taking a deeper look at Russia and why it feels, as you've just said, that it needs this safety buffer, this corridor. Why is it an absolute necessity? But that will be when next you appear on the show. But for now, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's an honor as usual. Thank you.
When we return, OPEC sticks with supply cuts as West tightens sanctions on Russian oil. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. It, quote, will take years to get energy prices back to pre-Ukraine war levels, and that's according to the boss of one of the world's biggest energy firms. Enel's Francesco Storace says bringing prices down depends on new sources of energy such as renewables and heat pumps. Governments across Europe are spending billions helping business and households afford energy bills. They're also scrambling to secure new supplies. Mr. Storace says the company, which produces and distributes electricity and gas, tried to shield its 20 million European customers from energy market volatility this year. He said it also did its best to stick to the fixed price contracts it had agreed to. He adds that breaking customer trust would inflict greater damage on the firm than a hit on 1 year's results. The Italian energy giant sells power to more than 70 million homes and businesses in over 30 countries. OPEC and its allies have decided to stick with their existing policy of curtailing oil output just hours before new Western sanctions on Russian crude exports come into force. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and other major oil-producing countries, including Russia, said they would continue to restrict supply by 2 million barrels per day, a policy set in October that started last month and is due to run through the end of 2023. OPEC said in a statement at a meeting held via video conference that the decision taken in October was and that decision was taken in October, and that the group was ready to meet at any time to address market developments if necessary. The cuts agreed to in October, the biggest since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, drew criticism from the United States. The Biden administration had called them short-sighted and said they would hurt low and middle-income countries by pushing energy prices higher. And the European Union will adapt its state aid rules to prevent an exodus of investment triggered by a new U.S. green energy subsidy package. That's according to the bloc's chief executive, Ursula von der Leyen. The 27-country bloc fears that the U.S. $430 billion Inflation Reduction Act, with its generous tax breaks, may lure away EU businesses and disadvantage European companies from car manufacturers to makers of green technology.
Competition is good. We like it. It's important. It drives innovation. It enhances efficiency. It ensures progress. And in doing so, it brings down prices for clean technologies. Competition between Europe and the United States can push both our industries to excel, to innovate, to transform faster, and all this is necessary. But we will also drive through this competition down costs for clean energy technologies globally. So together, the United States and the European Union, we can make clean energy more affordable worldwide if we work together. But, you expected a but in all this, but this competition must respect a level playing field. And that's why it is so critical that the technology competition between the European Union and the United States is a race to the top for our industries on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, will this be enough to keep up the clean tech race? Yes, if we are competing on a level playing field. So we must take action to rebalance the playing field where the IRA and other measures create distortions. Yet the Inflation Reduction Act should make us reflect on how we can improve our state aid framework and adapt it to a new global environment. Europe has built a very precise system. But business today wants state aid rules to be predictable above all. And if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, it invests right along the value chain in some strategic sectors. And this is not always the case with our state aid.
Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union Commission President. Let's now speak to Chukwuemeka Eze, former lecturer on diplomatic and consular relations law at the Faculty of Law, Nasarawa State University, KEFI. He speaks to us from Abakaliki, the capital of Ebonyi State. Good morning to you, Mr. Eze. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
Let's begin with this humanitarian grain initiative for Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, but focusing mainly on Africa. My last guest said that he wasn't too optimistic that this would give Ukraine a very strong foothold on the African continent, where Russia is already quite well entrenched from years back. Do you agree with this, especially against the backdrop that many of the countries that are listed as beneficiaries are countries that are really poor and need this grain aid?
I agree with your guest. Africa's relationship with Ukraine is economic. Africa's relationship with Russia is more than economic. It is military, it is strategic, it is economic, it is technological. So I don't think the grain deal will give any more than economic advantage to Ukraine. So I think Ukraine, especially in this war, knowing that Russia is a member of the United Nations Security Council. Many African countries will need its support to have many issues affecting these countries resolved in their favor at the United Nations Security Council. So Ukraine is not a United Nations Security Council member. So apart from supplying its grains to African countries, I don't see much African countries will have to do with Ukraine.
Let's come to the conflict itself now, and of course, as you're seeing in the visual on the screen, the ships are going on. Now, there are two initiatives that are going on almost side by side. There's this humanitarian one that goes to particularly poor countries, vulnerable countries, but there's the main one, which is the one that allows Ukraine to supply most of the rest of the world, whether rich or poor, with grain supplies which they need. Now, that has been looked at as a diplomatic triumph, but there are many people who thought that was going to be the start of something more substantial towards ending the conflict. Both sides at different times have said that they are willing to discuss, but it appears as if both of them have put preconditions on their participation, on their willingness to discuss peace. Even the Pope position, when he tried to intervene, also became controversial because of other comments he made related to other matters. Do you think that it's possible that we are not going to actually get to the point where these two sides and their allies ever get to talk?
I believe strongly that they will talk, but they want to get advantages before they talk. Russia must get security guarantees before it will talk. I don't see Ukraine winning this war. They might succeed in getting back some of their territories, but basically they are not going to win this war. If we look into the history of Russian wars, for the past 100 years, Russia has not really lost any war. Even the Second World War, where Russia was pushed to the wall, it eventually succeeded with their allies. So as for this war, no matter what happens, it will end up either on a round table or on a square table, but there will be talks. Russia must have security guarantees from NATO, and there is a level to which NATO members will not deplete their arms stocks in order to make a point with Ukraine. Many of them are depleting their arms stocks now. So there's a level you take your visitor or your guest to, and you say, okay, you can go home now. So, and I think they are getting to that point because they cannot continue to give sophisticated weapons. I don't think Ukraine can pay for some of the type of weapons they are demanding. And some of these countries, after a while, will ask themselves, what are we fighting for? What do we want? So Ukraine is even being brought to stone age as we speak now. The destruction of infrastructure, especially energy infrastructure, will bring Ukraine to its knees. Some of this equipment will require energy to perform. Today, many Ukrainians, they use firewood, they use generators. They have a level to which they can continue with this, especially in this winter. So I see the parties that they will talk. Russia has even taken it to another dimension, as it is alleged that they have sent some sick packages to 17 countries, diplomatic missions of Ukraine. So, but be that as it may, the continuous shelling and sending of missiles against Ukraine will get to a point that they will be brought completely to their knees, and they must talk. So, but it will not be easy. Russia will not lose this war, but the amount of damage that will be caused before the parties talk, that is what I cannot put my hand upon and say this is the level of damage that will be caused before the parties will talk. But certainly they will talk. The First World War ended up in talks. The Second World War ended up in talks. The Russia-Ukraine war will end up in talks.
But it seems as if in this particular one, what has complicated it is the support. It's not strictly just Russia fighting Ukraine. There's on both sides, the Russians have the support of the Indians, the Chinese principally, the North Koreans, the Iranians, and then you have the Ukrainians having the support of essentially Western powers, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, and the likes. Now, even if Ukraine and Russia were willing to sit down and talk, because the damage is being done essentially in those two countries, these other participants, I don't know if we'll call them participants, may not be so inclined to join in these talks. Don't you think that complicates the situation?
They will join. The reason why I say they will join is that as we speak, their stocks are being depleted. NATO members, they are sending arms to Ukraine, and they are taking these arms from their stocks. Some of these arms they're worth hundreds of millions in dollars. It took them many years to package those arms, and they are giving them out to Ukraine. They have a level to which they can give to Ukraine. They also need to retain some in case of wars in future. So I think they will talk. And if you heard Macron right during his visit last week, he was in the United States of America. He said the West should begin to prepare its mind on how to grant security guarantees to Russia. So if France, which is a member of the United Nations Security Council, a member of NATO, a member of the West, has told this not only to the United States president, but has said this to NATO and Europe, it cannot be dismissed. So I think they want to talk, but all these conditions, they are certain. And they will get to a point, there will be a compromise. So, but I think they want to get more advantages. Russia want to get more advantages. Ukraine want to get more advantages before the talks. Because the original conditions set by Russia, it was, in fact, no reasonable person could have accepted those conditions. It's like giving away completely part of your territory. But as it is today, the West is beginning to come to terms that Crimea might be left for Russia. Russia has become so entrenched in Crimea that it is all becoming almost accepted that Ukraine will never have Crimea again. So this was a reality that Ukraine didn't want to live with at the beginning. And as it is today, we are getting to a point that they will convince Ukraine to live with that. But the other ones that have been like Kherson, Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk, all those ones that they have brought into their territory, I mean Russia, pushing Russia to reverse that law will also be part of the compromise on the part of Russia. So I see them talking. They will talk. Just give them a time. In 2023, I believe this war will not go beyond 2023.
Indeed, and there will be many who will be saying a big amen to those predictions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chukwuemeka Eze, for your perspective and for your time this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm grateful. Thank you.
And after the break, the bodies of 2,500 seals are found along the Caspian Sea coast. Why? Join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. And Laddie Williams joins me this Monday morning. Laddie, morning.
Good morning.
The G7 have agreed their price cap.
Finally.
But nobody seems to be happy. The Russians are not happy. The Ukrainians are not happy.
Yes.
But factually, it will bring down Russia's revenues.
Exactly, it will, because at the end of the day, you know, we're seeing where Brent is right now. It's about $86, you know, per barrel, and you know that differential, you know, is quite big. And at the end of the day, you know, this cap is to, you know, bring down Russia's revenue from oil and gas and all of that.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we still see, you know, some countries still, you know, not satisfied, you know, with this cap. Some are saying that it should have come down at least $30,
exactly,
you know, per barrel. But at the end of the day, we know Russia's been able to sell, you know, some of this cheap oil to countries like China, you know, and India, even though we know China's had issues with, you know, COVID.
Yeah, because of COVID, so the economy has been affected.
Yeah, but this cap is, you know, going to officially, you know, bring down that price, and it's good for, you know, countries like China and India, because, you know, they'll be buying, you know, cheap oil, you know,
and probably they'll be buying even cheaper
on the ground. But now, you know, they'll be able to do it officially, you know, buying around that, you know, $60,
right?
You know, so it's not good for Russia, because at the end of the day, they're having to actually officially sell, you know, at this price, meaning, you know, they might even want to get more negotiations downward, you know, with the way it's looking. But the way it's set up right now, insurance companies and the transporters of this oil, they are the ones that are going to keep an eye on all of this, because they will not, you know, move any oil that's above, you know, the cap.
That's right.
And you know, it's going to impact Russia, you know, negatively. We're already seeing how the sanctions, you know, are wrecking the Russian economy at this point. So this is the major target right now, the revenue they're getting from oil, even though they'll still be getting, you know, quite a substantial amount, you know, from this level. But they've set it up in a way where, with the volatilities, you know, in the oil market, they're able to still shift, you know, because if prices go lower, say for instance, gets to $60, they have to move it further down, you know. So it's countries like, you know, China, India that would enjoy this, but if they go above the cap, then they're at risk of getting secondary, you know, sanctions.
But this is happening at the same time that OPEC is agreeing not to increase its production during this period.
Yeah, so apparently another surprise move there from OPEC. But, you know, at the end of the day, we know they did cut output by about 2 million barrels in October. So analysts were expecting, you know, maybe a further cut, you know, because they were seeing oil prices still, you know, going down, you know, at this point. But apparently it seems the market kind of, you know, was okay, you know, with this maintaining status quo, you know, because we're seeing oil prices actually up, you know, this morning. But at the end of the day, we know that OPEC, you know, they want to keep prices, you know, elevated at this time, and we know the U.S., you know, on the other hand, is trying to, you know, see how they can bring, you know, prices down. It's a surprise move, their last meeting for the year, but now with this, what's happening in China and with this oil price cap issue, we're expecting more volatility, you know, in the oil market going forward. And with this 2 million barrel cut still, you know, maintained, it remains to be seen how the market actually reacts, you know, going forward. You know, some analysts are saying that oil will still top, you know, $100 per barrel. But with the way it's looking, you know, with the
might be some way off.
Yeah, with the demand issues we're seeing in China, even though we're seeing China relax, you know, the COVID policies, you know, gradually.
Which may also have its own impact on their economic activity.
Exactly. So it remains to be seen, you know, what OPEC actually does, you know, next, you know, at their next meeting, you know, next year. So we'll be watching out for that, but still volatility expected with commodities like oil.
How are the markets doing this Monday? I know it's still early time.
Yeah, still early. Still early, but, you know, investors are still, you know, quite cautious, you know, at this time. In the U.S., we're seeing investors, you know, looking out for some key economic data, you know, coming out this week that would actually, you know, give them an insight into the next meeting, you know, for the U.S. Fed is going to have, you know.
Yeah, the final meeting of the year.
The final meeting of the year. Investors have been expecting at least 50 basis points, you know, even though we've had, you know, hawkish hawkish and dovish statements at the same time, from the
Which
Fed.
means that at the end of the day, we're back to square one.
Yeah, so something is going to have to happen. And,
Right.
and is the battle against inflation, is still there. We're expecting that PPI data, this week to see how much producer prices have gone up, for production. But we're seeing quite a mixed bag, in the markets today. But we're seeing, the crypto markets still, staying above that 17K level. That's talking about Bitcoin. So there's a little optimism there, but still cautious because that market also reacts to what's happening, with the U.S. There's still that, correlation between Bitcoin and most of those U.S. markets. So we're watching out. It's still early in the week, but obviously volatility is expected as usual, what we've seen, in these markets. But, everyone is expecting some kind of Santa rally, this year.
Yeah, because we're getting closer.
So it remains to be seen if that actually happens.
Indeed. Thank you, Laddie. Updates of this, of course, right after this on Business Morning and later on Business Incorporated. Amy John McQuarrie is back, so she rejoins the crew. We look forward to seeing her at some point. Thanks, Laddie.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the sports. Britain's Tyson Fury says he's expecting to have the, quote, biggest year of his career yet in 2023 after beating Derek Chisora on Saturday for the third time to retain his WBC heavyweight boxing title. The Gypsy King says an undisputed championship clash with Ukraine's Alexander Usyk is his target for the first quarter of 2023. The Ukrainian, who was present at the fight, which took place at Tottenham Stadium in London, also confirmed he wants the fight to happen.
At the end of the night, well, we're going to see the biggest year of, hopefully, my career. 2023, we're going to get them big fights that the fans really crave. First of all, let's talk about Usyk, because now I can. Before, everyone once asked me a million questions about Usyk when I've got Chisora to beat. And as we see tonight, Chisora's no easy pushover for anybody. So yeah, I'm ready, I'm willing to take on Usyk next. Sometimes the big fights sometimes don't happen for whatever reason. But I've got a good feeling this one's going to happen. But if it doesn't for X, Y or Z reasons, then we'll have Joe Joyce at Wembley.
Finally on the program, about 2,500 seals have been found dead on the Caspian Sea coast in southern Russia. Officials say there's no sign that they died violent deaths. Some 700 of the dead seals were initially reported, but further investigations have revealed a much higher number, and counting continues. Caspian seals have been classified as endangered on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List since 2008. Zar Gapisov, head of the Caspian Environmental Protection Center, said in a statement that the seals probably died about 2 weeks ago. There's no evidence to suggest the animals were killed or caught in fishing nets. The Dagestan region's Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment wrote in Telegram that a large number had been found between the mouths of two rivers, the Sulak and the Shurenka. Experts have collected samples from the seals, and the ministry said reasons for the deaths will be established when lab results are returned. The seal population of the Caspian Sea has dwindled drastically over the decades from overhunting and industrial population or pollution. The Caspian Environmental Protection Center puts the number now at just 70,000, down from more than 1 million around a century ago. That's where we end the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Laddie Akiri Dundwale. There's an update throughout the day, especially on our program, The World Today, at 5 o'clock. Do watch out for that. For now, do go out there and have yourselves a great Monday and a pleasant week ahead. Good morning.